Welcome, everyone, to Strictly Speaking, Conversations with Theater Makers. My name is Jamie Malama. For those who don't know me, I'm the resident scenic designer at University Theater. Tonight, we have opera stage director Tara Faircloth with us. Thanks so much for joining us, Tara.
Thank you. So glad to be with you.
So, how are you doing?
What a great question.
Right?
Yeah, it's been a pretty strange 7 months, what have you. I have to say, actually, I'm doing pretty well. On March 13, I don't know how it was in the rest of the arts community, but in the opera world, over the course of about 48 hours, we had tons of cancellations, and I lost about 80% of my income for the year that was planned.
Wow. That must have been a really scary 48 hours.
It was tough. I mean, mainly because you just started to feel the avalanche coming and seeing, looking on Facebook and seeing the dominoes fall. So that was pretty scary time. I will have a sidebar. We can talk about this more in a minute, but I actually have developed a financial system for freelancers. And I do workshops with young people all over America, freelancing for budget. Actually, it's called Budget 101, what they didn't teach you in music school. So you know what? I was really patting myself on the back because thank God I had that financial structure in place. And so actually, I have not felt wildly insane about money. Also, because I stumbled across basically, I made a hobby that I had, and which is hand painting needlepoint canvases, and I started selling them on Etsy, and it really took off. Like a lot of things, like people were really looking for things to do in quarantine, so the needlepoint community exploded, and I'm very happy to have been riding that wave, and it's made me feel again much less worried about kind of this hibernation period. Wow, this is such a long answer. But the other part of the answer is this is the longest I've been at home in my adult life, because being an opera director necessarily means being on the road a lot. And so, yeah, I mean, that has been amazing. Like having a garden, being with my boyfriend. It's been amazing. So being at home has been great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make the most of it.
Yeah, I think that's what we're all trying to do. That's really cool. I didn't know about the needlepoint thing. That's really fun.
I mean, it's all brand new. Just started in April, and honestly, it's like almost completely replaced my directing work as of right now, just income-wise. So that's pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome.
I'm happy about it. Although I do spend hours per day making a million tiny little pixelated dots of paint. So that's a different thing.
Right.
I love it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Are you still working on opera projects, or do you have stuff that is the community trying to line anything up, or?
Well, it's such a weird place. It's funny because singers, like they can sing in their living rooms or they can create recitals and put them online. But as a director, I can't really do that. So I had a couple of projects that, they didn't fully cancel, but like, maybe we'll postpone till the fall. Maybe we'll postpone till then. And then it was like, oh, can you do a La Traviata and have all the singers be 6 feet apart at all times? Like what kind of show is that? And so, the first several months was a lot of like juggling and trying to figure out, can I do that? Oh, it's a whole show about a love affair, like, and they never touch and never kiss. Like, what does that look like?
We went through that conversation with several of our shows as well, being like, can we do this? Should we do this? Yeah, like we're going to do Lovesick. It's a whole show about love, and there's a lot of touching and kissing, and we're like,
well, I don't know if you know, but La Traviata is about the heroine has a disease, a coughing disease, which kills her. She dies of consumption.
Oh, so, well, maybe not that show.
I was like, this is either the perfect show for right now or the most horrible choice that was ever made. So,
right.
Long story short, it's been postponed till next year. Yes, so there are some companies that are, really trying to pull it together and do some kind of video presentation, or these, again, like social distanced operas. Or even, quarantining groups of singers together, and then after 2 weeks, then they can take off the masks and they take tests every day. I mean, it's just a mess because it's all about like what companies have, the resources or the personnel.
Right.
And in some ways, for instance, the Metropolitan Opera just said, we're not doing anything for a year.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so in a way, like some of the mid-sized or smaller companies are more agile and can punt. Yeah, it's a really hard time of questioning and wondering. There was an article kind of early on that said that, I think the title of it was, I am a cobbler in a world where people no longer wear shoes.
Yes.
And I've really felt like that.
I saw you post that and I read it and I was like, yes. I'm like, because even with Zoom things, like Zoom performances and productions, it's like there's very little design happening. And if so, it's like, we need some background Photoshop done. And like, that's, so yeah, it feels like, yeah.
And also,
pumping your energies in new things.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many, like, we'll show a video of the show we did before. And I'm like, well, that's kind of, like, that's just a record of something awesome that happened. It's not an awesome thing happening.
I mean, it's a nice stopgap for the moment, but, I saw that Little Prince happened.
Oh, yeah.
They did, they put it out there for folks to watch.
Yeah.
Which is
nice.
Which is cool. Yeah. I mean, I certainly tuned in for a lot of the stuff the National Theatre was doing in London. So,
yeah, that's cool. Well, I think what's like awkward though is that in opera, like filming the show is not really usually on the docket. So, these were like archival videos with one camera angle or whatever, like they were not made to be shared. So that's also awkward from a director designer perspective. Like, this isn't really,
I was like,
this isn't the experience.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
So, okay, what now for folks who may not know, in your own words, can you define what it means to be a stage director for opera for you? What does that role mean for you?
Wow.
I know.
This is like the hardest question in the world, I think.
I think so too.
I mean, in a very like grand scale way, I think it's like having a vision and a journey for the way an opera should go, having the idea of the journey that you want the audience to take. And I'm the bus driver, so I'm picking up the people that take me on the way. I'm helping make the decisions. I'm a traffic cop. I'm making sure we hit all our stops. But yeah, so it's, I think in a lot of ways like a film director, except so from a practical perspective, it means working with the company beforehand to determine what the vision is, gathering a creative team if it's a new production, which is always the dream, and like trying to be the hub for that, all those creative voices. And for me, I mean, I really don't want to be the sole creative voice, but it's my dream to like attract a bunch of talented people who throw out a bunch of ideas. And then it's my job, I think, to try to winnow the ideas to the best ones that all work towards the same goal. And then in the rehearsal room, it's working with the singers in a similar way, knowing what the overall vision of the piece is. And then again, trying to pull the best out of them. I don't really want to be like a Nazi just telling everyone what to do, although sometimes that is required for choruses in particular. But again, trying to pull the best out of people, point them in the right direction, so we're all going to the same destination. And then what's different from a film director, for instance, is then I leave. Like we make it happen together, and then I send them on their way, and just hope that they carry the boat the rest of the way in the performances. There's one long-winded explanation.
No, it's perfect. So something you mentioned in there that I wanted to ask real quick is, so you mentioned new production versus something else. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't know if this happens in other fields. I don't know.
Less so, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah. So a new production is exactly what it sounds like. It is a director and usually an existing opera, so like Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, and the director and the company decide on the creative team of scenic design, costume, lighting. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. The orchestra conductor, obviously,
right,
is a key part of that team, and we create the vision for a piece. So Jamie and I did a Hansel and Gretel a few years ago, which was a lot of fun.
It was.
And, sometimes you have a lot of money, sometimes you don't. Usually you don't. So about figuring out how to just create the most amazing world out of what you've got. So that's a new production. And then in opera, we do a lot of remounts. And so there's actually two versions of that. There's the remount, which is we are putting on the Rob Ashford Barber of Seville in Chicago, for instance. And so either the assistant director from the previous production might come back or they might hire somebody else to figure it out. And based on archival footage and all of the archival documents, we're basically creating the same show, like same choreography, same sets and costumes, obviously. So that's a remount, although it's often different performers. And then there's what's in Europe called a restudy, but we don't have a term for it in America, which I don't know why the heck not, because it happens a lot. And that is, hey, Tara, we're going to do Carmen next year. We already have a set. We have some costumes. Can you come do whatever you want on the set to do Carmen? And so that's like my direction and my vision for the piece on somebody's existing set, and maybe somebody different, completely a different set of costumes. Or maybe I like really put my foot down and I say, Carmen must wear a yellow dress, and I get some new costumes.
Right.
Or I can do something wacky and like, okay, I have this set that looks like Seville, but I'm going to do all of the lighting is going to be all ballet side lighting, something really wackadoodle. In opera world, that would be wackadoodle. Right. It would be beautiful probably, but so those are three different kinds.
Yeah, that restudy happens in America. We just don't have that term. That's really interesting.
Yeah, most regional theaters, that's what they're doing.
And there's like I did an opera at the Princeton Festival, and so the set was new and the cast and everything was new, but the costumes were a bought package. Just like, we're just going to use all these costumes. I hope they work with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which worked just fine. But
yeah, and sometimes it does not.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not. And you're like, okay, how do I make these things go together? That was a little bit, in that situation, it was like, I didn't know what the costume package looked like before. So I'm like,
yeah.
And you just make it work. So I have a couple questions from folks.
Okay.
So, from an anonymous attendee, with so much opera having these big established stories, how much creative freedom do you tend to get in a production versus sticking with what is expected from that title?
Depends on the company. There's actually, it's funny, opera gets such a hard rep, I think. And I don't know, Joshua, if we want to pull up some pictures from my lookbook. Yes, if you're doing Marriage of Figaro, then there are certain expectations. But so like here's little print. Yeah, so let's look at Marriage of Figaro. Here's their Marriage of Figaro that I did in Arizona last year. And as you can see, very traditional costumes. Yeah. And a very muted, beautiful palette. But these singers had never worked together before. And it was a set that none of us had worked on before. And the set did not belong with the costume. So we had to make some adjustments to the costumes so it didn't look insane. And lighting helped a lot, as it always does.
Yes.
But, particularly with these beautiful, big grand classics like Marriage of Figaro, there are a lot of expectations. This is why I particularly love working on less well-known pieces. Let's go down to Coronation of Poppaea. That's the next one. This was with Boston Baroque. And this is actually one of the oldest operas in the repertory. Literally. I think it's the second one in the modern rep that we do. It's from like 1610 maybe. But it doesn't get done all that often. And so I definitely had parameters to follow, but in the orchestra, as you can see, was on stage behind us. But, you can kind of do whatever the heck you want with that because there's no expectation. And honestly, I think, people in American audiences are more adventurous than we give them credit for, I think, a lot of times. And as you can see, there's some wackadoo stuff happening. Like these roses were on stage all the time. There was a lot of business with the roses and stuff. This was also a situation where we had to load into our venue in like 5 hours. So I had to make design choices based on that kind of ridiculousness.
Right.
Also, if you go down a little bit more, I think Agrippina, is the next one. So this was another, we don't have a lot of money, but you can do whatever the hell you want, Tara, kind of show. Cool. And so we set it in the 1920s. And so like this chandelier scene was a garden scene. And that was just like a bench and 12 chandeliers hanging. So, I think in straight theater, you see that kind of business a lot more. But in opera, we usually have a little bit more set than that. But I was actually, again, this was like one of the most enjoyable projects that I worked on that year.
I think it does get a bad rap, and it's prevalent in theater too. Like there are expectations when you're doing Wizard of Oz about what certain things should look like, right? And same with a lot of the big musicals come with baggage like that.
Yeah.
And which is very similar to that.
Although I think it's funny because I used Marriage Figaro as an example a couple of times because to me, honestly, it was written in 1790s or 86, whatever, around that time. And it's still one of the most applicable modern shows that you can imagine. I mean, just like the way people act with one another, with a husband that's stepping out on his wife and macking on the servants.
Right.
And some people look at Marriage of Figaro and they think it's a really dark tale of like an abusive master. And it is. It totally is about sexual harassment and these sorts of things. But it is also an incredible love story, and it shows, different facets of love at all different ages, including middle age when things start to fade, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's a delightful comedy. It's just like a masterpiece. So it's all of the above, really.
Yeah. So Nicole is asking the exact question I was about to ask, which is, how did you first get involved in opera? It seems a lot less widespread than community theater opportunities.
Well, to be honest, I was a singer. So I started as a singer in Georgia. So there's hardly any opera to be found. I mean, I never saw an opera till I went to college. And, but I was a Broadway kid. I was a music theater kid. And, I was like the leading lady in all the shows in high school and such. And then I went to college, and I don't know how this happened. When I think about how dumb I was, it's unbelievable. But, I was just like, I'm going to study music. I'm going to study voice. And so in that time, when you went to school for voice, that meant you were going to study opera, basically, like classical voice. That was the track. Mm-hmm. And so without any forethought at all, I was like, I guess that's what I'm doing, even though that was not my experience at all or whatevs. So blah, blah, blah. I get to the end of my master's degree in singing, and I was doing kind of okay. And I got conned into directing a Baroque opera. like for no credit. I don't know how I got conned into that, but all of a sudden I was like, wow, why wasn't I doing this all along? This is everything I love about the theater and none of the things I don't, namely practicing by myself in a room.
Right.
So I became an opera director.
That's awesome. Sounds a lot like my journey of like, you mean I can do art, which is the thing that I'm going to school for, and the theater, this thing that I do on the side together? And it kind of connected all. I took a class, and that was like in that class, I was like, whoa. And it just kind of all came together. But
well, I will point out though, I had no experience besides this like tiny show that I directed at school.
right.
And so I had to figure out how to do all that really fast, or whatever, to make a living in some way. And so I ended up selling most of my belongings, and I bought an Airstream trailer, which, if you guys don't know, it's like the silver travel trailers. They look like a Twinkie, a burrito. So I lived in a trailer park for 3 years while I took every horrible theater job that came my way so I could learn the other side of the table.
Right.
So that was a fun adventure that I recommend, actually. I think it's a good life experience.
I've got a couple more questions. So David Jones is asking, I know there's extra spacing required for safety now for singers. Is it known if opera singers require even extra room due to the way they sing?
Yes, actually some companies, there are only a few companies in America doing this kind of experimental social distancing stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, for a multitude of reasons, but nobody wants to be the first company to kill a company of singers, is part of it. And also our audiences are a lot of times older people, so we don't want to kill them off particularly. But yes, because of the explosive nature with the aerosol particles, when you sing at great force, that creates a thing. So a lot of places are 6 feet is kind of their minimum, but I was asked about doing a 13 feet between people. Like Tulsa Opera this weekend or next weekend, I think is doing a Rigoletto at the baseball field, and they're going to be on different bases. I don't know how that's going to work. So I don't know. I mean, to me, these are like exciting experiments, and I can't wait to hear all about them. I'll be painting.
Yes, right. So Lydia is asking if you have a favorite opera or opera that you've worked on.
Oh, wow. I mean, they're my little babies. So.
I know, they're all my children, yes.
Exactly. Well, I'm such a lame-o because Marriage Figaro is probably one of my favorites, although I've directed it 3 or 4 times in the last several years, and I'm kind of feeling like I need a little break.
Might be good.
Yeah. But I love Coronation Epopeia. That's it. As I said, it's such an early opera, but there are some scenes that are so hot. It's crazy. Like, you cannot believe it that did people have sex back then? Amazing. So that's awesome. I also, I did The Little Prince a year ago. And that was like such a magical experience. I really love working with children's chorus, which is unusual. I don't have children of my own. Maybe that's why I like them.
Yeah.
Choristers. But so I loved working with the children on The Little Prince. And that's a modern opera. As you can see, we drew a lot of inspiration from the original drawings from that book by Exupéry. And there you are. Sorry, I lost my Zoom for a minute.
Uh-oh.
And so that was actually a lot of fun too. I don't know. I love them all. I love Midsummer Night's Dream by Benjamin Britten.
I love that one too. That's the one I did at Princeton, and I was like, oh, I love this.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I try to fall in love really with whatever I'm working on, because otherwise you want to kill yourself, because it's like 2 years of prep and then pouring your heart and soul into it forever. So
2 years, that's a long time.
I mean, it isn't always that much time, but you kind of have an idea that it's going to be that way for a couple years.
Wow.
So
So that goes to this anonymous question of how does the rehearsal process for opera work? And I'm going to add, is it different? How is it might be different than theater or a straight play?
I mean, honestly, you might have to tell me how it's different from theater.
Yeah, I know.
Yourself, but I've done a little bit of theater, but okay. So one thing that's different from theater is the singers, they get hired, usually a year or so in advance, and they know their role completely when they come to rehearsal. The first day of rehearsal is a sing through. We usually call it first day of school, and you meet everybody and usually some board members at a luncheon. And then we all go into a room, and the singers who've been trying not to eat during that luncheon, probably because they're really nervous, all have to sing the whole show straight through from beginning to end. And honestly, it's kind of a big deal because a lot of times people get fired after that first day. If they don't know the music or they can't sing it for some reason, because they might have auditioned for it 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
So that's fun. Often, I mean, actually, that's kind of a relaxing day for me because I'm just sitting there watching and judging. No, but I am watching them in action, seeing how they interact with the maestro. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so then after that, we go into staging. I will say that in regional theaters right now, the rehearsal period is ridiculously short. I often have 10 days of staging time.
That is definitely much shorter than theater.
I mean, as I said, they already know the music, but they don't know the concept or what I'm doing with them or their coworkers. So we work ourselves to the bone. We only no one singer can be called any more than 6 hours a day. That's our union standard, but we can have more rehearsals than that. One guy might be called to the morning and afternoon and somebody else the afternoon, evening.
Right.
So, yep, we work ourselves to the bone, staging. We have choruses. Depending on where you're working, it might be a professional chorus, but only a few companies have, only 2 companies in America have a full-time chorus. But so often that's on the weekends or at night. And then we go into technical rehearsals in the theater. So yeah, so it's usually 10 days or so. In bigger houses, it's a bit longer, but there are a lot more rules to work around. So that's another fun thing. But and then tech is usually about a week or a week and a half, depending on the house. And then we start our shows. And then most companies, smaller regional companies, there's usually 3 or 4 shows. They are every other day at least, or sometimes they're every other day on 2 different weekends, because you can't sing an opera every night after night. And or larger houses can be 6 to 10, and they're spread out over a while. As I said, I leave after opening night, so
right.
So my contract, I'm usually in and out of there in 4 to 5 weeks. So it's pretty brisk.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So earlier you mentioned the Baroque repertoire and I saw it was of particular special interest to you. What draws you to that particular subset?
Well, I think, number one, as mentioned, that's where I started. So that's
right.
I mean, I don't know that that's special, but I've always loved Baroque music as a singer also. I think I'm really drawn to it. I love the music, number one. It really speaks to me. And number 2, it is a creatively more wide open field. As I said, Mozart, you can certainly do a lot of interpretations on Mozart. But Handel, I mean, I don't know, almost no one does actual Handelian costumes these days. It would cost $1 billion. For one thing. So very often they're updated or treated in wacky ways. Like I said before, my Agrippino set in the 20s. It was like a Great Gatsby throwback. And Yes. So I just feel like there's so much option for creativity, and also the form of the music is more creatively open to interpretation. I should like
Oh,
in Baroque music, um, there are little sections where people have some conversation, and then their arias are about emotion. So an aria is never like, and then I stabbed her in the guts, and then this,
right.
like I like watching Hamilton, like it's nonstop action or like explanation of things, yada yada yada. A Handel opera, there might be a 7-minute opera aria where they talk about how they feel about something, or like they really explore their emotions. And
Mhm.
so you've got to figure out how to make that interesting to the audience. And so it is wide open creatively, which is really why I'm drawn to it.
That's great. So yeah, obviously a lot of those are in various languages.
Yes.
Um, are you, do you learn those languages? Are you fluent in any of them, or is it you just kind of go with the show because you know the show?
Oh, here's my horrible dark secret. I would not call myself fluent in any language but English, and barely
Right.
that one.
Sure.
I speak a little bit of a lot of different languages,
Mhm.
and I can read Italian and French, and I can't read German anymore, but I used to be able to. But I do know what every word of what people are saying on stage.
Yeah, sure.
So I translate everything. I have it written in my score, so I have it with me. But for instance, Figaro, by now I've done it so many times that like I don't even need to look at the translation at all because I know exactly what's going on.
Right.
If you are interested in working in the opera field, I would definitely say learning a language would be an excellent way to spend your time. We do, like I studied French for 4 years, and I took Italian, and we take diction classes, and I studied German, and it's just that I'm a horrible language student is actually the short
Mhm.
story. So
Feel
it's my deep shame.
that. So is that something you did in with your music major?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, my voice degrees I studied.
yes, voice. Thank you.
Um, and it's certainly important because
Hmm.
yes, 90% of the year I'm working not in English.
Right.
So
There are
um,
a lot more in English language operas now than there ever was, but
yeah,
still, it is in the minority.
yeah.
Um, I have noticed that you have worked with a lot of different companies repeatedly, which is always the dream, right?
Yeah.
So how is, I don't want to like not be like what is your secret, but like how does someone go about developing those kinds of relationships with companies?
Well, honestly, when I started making the transition from singer to director, I I kind of made a little vow to myself that every company I worked for, I would get asked to come back. Um, and so, I mean, not that there's any magic in it, but I think actually laying that down as a goal for yourself was really important. Now, I worked as an assistant director in several companies to begin with. So, for instance, Utah Opera has been so good to me, honestly.
Yeah.
I started with them as an assistant, and then they brought me in to like direct some of their young artists, one hour shows or whatever. And so, I mean, again, I'm sure you teach this to all your students, but like being decent to people, trying to be a person, just following the golden rule, do unto
Yes.
others as you would have them do unto you,
Don't be a jerk.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like I try to be the kind of person to work with that I would want to work with. So
Mhm.
to me, that means being, responsible, say doing what I'll say I'll do, being pleasant and respectful to other people, and actually, I try to have a good time. Like
Mhm.
that's kind of a big part of it too. And
Yeah.
honestly, I'm horrible at networking, so uh, I I think I'm really bad at networking, but I am pretty good at being nice to my friends. So I try to view it in that way, like I'm trying to make friends here.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's true of you. I mean, having worked with you a couple times, I've always had a good time. Yeah, we did Hansel and Gretel together. So how does working with the designers impact your process? Is there a lot of difference, do you think, in opera in the way you approach design?
Again, I
You
don't have
may
enough
not be able to.
experience to speak
Yeah.
outside, but I will say, I don't know, I always feel nervous when I work with a new designer because I feel like, I don't know if I know anything. And then I have to remind myself, like, oh, you've been doing this for 20 years. So
Yeah, you're good.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, my process with designers is like this. Like I call them up, we chit chat about how the show hit us. Sometimes one of us will have like an immediate important like edict. Like I really feel like it needs to be this way. Because I will say in opera, very often, it's not that I'm going to a company like, I have an amazing idea for this show, we should do it. In American opera, they've decided what they're doing usually like 5 years in advance and sometimes 10, which doesn't mean that they aren't open to new ideas. If you have a good idea, they might be. By the way, I need to talk to you about Hansel and Gretel, Jamie. Anyway,
Please.
Okay, good. So usually they're coming to me and saying, we want to do a brand new Coronation of Poppaea. Would you like to do it? And if you do, who would you like to work with? Or they might say, oh, we have a set designer already. Like, would you like to work with this set designer? So anyway, so we're already starting from the project exists. And so it is about getting to know the score and feeling like, what is the music telling me? I try to identify like, what the heck is this piece even about? Like, why does it exist? What do I want to say with it? Honestly, like I have to force myself to do that kind of work because I'm often they'll be like, Ariadne of Naxos, and I'll be like, I'm thinking navy, I'm thinking silver stars, like I immediately go to the fun part of like
right,
visual or whatever. So yeah, so then we kind of hash out that, then we go away, I pull out my hair and I decide that I'm the worst director and I'll never figure the show out. That goes on for a while. And then we start sharing imagery with each other usually. I often will really tap into a color palette, as I just said. And then I start sharing that. It's funny because there are several set designers that I work with or have worked with over the years. And there's several costume designers, but I kind of have one that I tend to return to on the costume front. So she's great because at this juncture, she can understand the weird lack of language that I bring to the table sometimes, and it's nice to have an old collaborator. It's Ruth. I'm talking about Ruth, Jamie.
Yes, Ruth.
Yes.
She's the best.
Yes. So yeah, and honestly, working with the designers is the best part. Don't tell the singers I said that. But they're the people that you spend the longest amount of time with from beginning to end, and they're the ones with you in the trenches during tech week when we're trying to get it all together. At that point, the singers are we certainly have a connection during the rehearsal time, but during tech, their sites have moved on to they're preparing themselves in a different way. And I'm our physical distance is much farther, but
yeah.
It's the designers that are staying up late nights trying to figure stuff out together, or if something is going wrong, we're all in the trenches trying to figure it out. So
yeah,
it's fun.
Can you this may be a shady question, but can you talk about any time where you've had a strong disagreement with a designer and how you handled it? Or maybe you don't, because you just surround yourself with the best people.
I just do. I mean, right? I think that I really can't think of a time.
That's good.
Oh, there was only one small thing, but it was so not a thing.
Right.
It was just like, what color the floor should be painted. That's so stupid. I mean, it was like, is it a pattern or is it a not pattern or whatever? And I mean, I still think I was right. And actually, my lighting designer is like, I think you're totally right. I'll read that later. But, you know, so I think you have to pick your battles. And I think it's my job to like forcefully, gently, lovingly make my case. And then obviously I hope the designer is the same and lovingly makes their case. And then, and then I have to pick my battle and decide how important it is to me.
Right.
Like, A, do I want to destroy the show? Is it going to destroy the show? Or B, is it going to destroy a relationship? And I think the relationship is part of the artwork. I know the audience can't see that necessarily, that part of it, but so in that case, I didn't push, you know what I mean? Like I trusted the designer, even though ultimately I think I was right. It wasn't a high stakes situation, and it certainly didn't ruin the show, but it would have been better. And I just tell that to my boyfriend. He hears all the secrets. So.
Well, I think, I mean, having worked with you, you're a very direct person. And if you like, I think if there are major design choices going down, you usually, I mean, you're going to head that off at the beginning, not at the end. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I hope so.
It just seems like it wouldn't happen suddenly in a tech moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I hope that we're on the same page from the beginning and that like nothing grows to a huge problem.
Right. Yeah. So I've, speaking of collaboration, you've done a very different collaborative experience recently, Loving Clara.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that project and what it was like?
Yeah. Loving Clara was kind of a dream come true. This is one of those circumstances where a company came to me and said, Tara, we are looking for something. We want it to be innovative and fresh and moving, and we think you're the person to do it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, like they were a company I'd worked with a lot, and they basically they wanted to buy what I was selling, whatever that might be. You know what I mean? Yes. And so I was like, well, here's a couple of rando ideas that I have had, and we settled on this one, which was. I realized that I gave you two pictures that are like basically exactly the same. So this is based on the story of Clara Schumann. So Clara Schumann was the wife of Robert Schumann. He was a very famous composer and conductor, and she was a rock star pianist. She was like a child prodigy, and her father like started taking her out on the road immediately when she was quite young, and she then married Robert Schumann, and he was very young. Like they fell in love when she was 16, I think, and they got married like 2 days after her 18th birthday or something crazy. And and then he immediately started to lose his mind. And so before that happened, though, they met a very handsome young composer who came to town named Johannes Brahms, which you might know from Brahms' Lullaby, or he's written tons of orchestral music. Mm-hmm. And he and Clara definitely loved each other. Mm. I don't know. We don't know how far that went. We know that they cared deeply for each other. He was also cared deeply for Robert. And Robert went into an insane asylum and was there for 3 years. And Brahms was the only one who saw him. And so blah, blah, blah. She had this like passionate love with Brahms, and then Robert died. And so she was available. And ultimately he decided he could not be the composer he wanted to be if he was romantically involved with her. So he broke it off, and it really broke her heart. Anyway, so that's a lot of drama.
Right.
And as it should be. So we made this, I created a show out of the music of those three amazing composers, which is like the heart of romantic art song and orchestral literature. And because you can see the orchestra, the chamber orchestra on stage. And the art song is not a repertoire that gets dramatized very often. It was designed to be performed like in people's living rooms during this time period, like think Little Women or Jane Austen films. That's a little early, but whatever. And so, as you may have noticed, there are 3 women playing Clara, a pianist, a singer, and a ballet dancer. And then there's these 2 men, and one a dancer, one a singer, and they played all the roles and switched off characters. And there's a video installation, modern dance, singing, purely orchestral, purely piano music. And so it's just like a whole amalgamation of everything that I dreamed of. And it was one of those situations where like it basically all happened exactly like you would have dreamed. I loved my collaborators there, and the singers were so committed to what was happening, and it was like a dream come true. And somebody paid me to do it. That's like
that's the best.
Yeah, exactly. It was awesome.
I imagine that had a very different process.
Yes. Well, although honestly, the rehearsal was in many ways quite similar, except we had, modern ballet dancers in the room with us. And so like working with a choreographer in that way I had to be really specific with her because we did not pay the dancers enough to be there for just hours and hours on end. So I had to be really clear about my desires for what the dances would be about. But I did quite a bit of stage managing and assistant directing for a modern dance company. So dance is also like a huge influence in my life. And but creating the show with the maestro was very different and super duper satisfying. And actually we're working on another show now, which hopefully will be performed in the next 2 years.
Be performed someday.
Yes, exactly. But it's going to be all the music of Monteverdi, but it's actually based on the Minotaur, Theseus and the Minotaur.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I hope so. It's a rich musical literature, so I'm pretty excited to be working on that. So
that's exciting. So earlier you mentioned your budget 101.
Yeah.
So tell me more about what that is.
I mean, honestly, it's pretty much the simplest thing. I mean, here I am just blowing what it is. It's basically like a large scale envelope system. But the workshop is really a lot about putting freelancers in the driver's seat and like realizing that it's our responsibility to do it, but it's also our privilege and how it makes us better artists and better people in the world. And then there's like a whole nuts and bolts section where I talk about making a budget and basically how to plan. Like, some years I might get 4 checks the whole year long. Like that's my income. And then some years I have 44 checks. I might have 40 checks in a month, if I'm doing a lot of private teaching or whatever. Yeah, I wrote a little book here, as you can see. But it's something I feel really passionate about because I just think, at least when I was in music school, like everyone just pretended like we knew what we were doing. And
you are not alone in all of theater and the arts. Like talking about money is just not something that's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more now than it was.
Yeah.
When like maybe you and I were going through school, but like talking about how to deal with your finances as an artist or a freelancer, it's just, there's not enough out there for it.
No.
There's not in schools anyway.
No. And honestly, I feel like a total rube. And like there's just so much to learn. But I guess like the big takeaway I hope people get from the workshop is that you can learn it just like everything else. It's just piece by piece. Just like devote yourself to reading 1 article about finances a month. Like that's a good start. Same thing with saving. Like start with $1 a week. And over time you'll see rewards. And basically that it is possible. It has to be because we're the only ones that are doing it.
That's right. So we're getting near the end. So what would you say to students or anyone else who are interested in becoming a stage director for opera? What piece of advice would you give?
I would say, number one, find a mentor. Oh, and I'll actually give a little plug. One thing that came out of this COVID experience, which is really nice, is that there's a coalition of opera directors. We had our first Zoom meeting. There were like 44 directors there. And I mean, literally, I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen these people in the same place. I haven't even laid eyes on a bunch of these people. Like, they're famous. And so that's exciting. And so our group is called Balancing the Stage. It's the Opera Directors Network. And we have a whole mentorship program that we've been setting up. So
excellent.
So find a mentor, go to balancingthestage.com or something. And or yes, it's balancingthestage.org. And you can just send an email to them and we can hook you up with that. I would say, I don't know, being a director is such a weird job. So you really need to, I think, expose yourself to everything interesting in the performance world. And then I would say dive in as best you can. And you're going to suck at the beginning. So like the Ira Glass thing about you have enough taste to know what's good, and you have enough taste to know that you're not it in the beginning. Like, but you don't get better without trying. And so I would learn languages. These are like, obviously, these are not just one set of advice, but I would devote myself to language studies. I have a music degree, so I was very much educated in the musical side of things, but it doesn't have to be that way. But I think it's about following your passion and, preparing for the life of an artist. But as far as getting started, I think that's actually a very difficult question to answer right now, because the landscape of American opera is frankly quite desolate right now. I don't think the opera as an art form is ever going to die, but I do think that it might look different in a year or two. The way we do things is going to change, and some of that's wonderful, and it's time. And
we've experienced some of that. Well, a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we should be rethinking 10 out of 12s. Hey, we should be really thinking about how we're falling short for people of color. We should be like, there's so much happening right now.
No, it's a tumultuous time, and it's really easy to feel despair about it. But I think, I try to embrace the light and like, let's like really look for like these connections with these directors that I've made. There's lots of good out there. You just need to decide which side you're going to look for.
Yeah.
That's what I tell myself.
Yes, same. All right. So thank you so much, Tara, for doing this with us. Yeah. It's been really lovely to catch up a little bit.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And thank you, audience folks, for tuning in to see what we're all about.